December 17th, 1944. Dawn over the Ardennes. The forest groaned under the weight of snow, muffling the thunder of distant artillery. Inside a battered M4 Sherman named Georgia Rose, frost clung to every steel surface. The crew huddled in silence, breath clouds mixing with diesel fumes. Outside, beyond a frozen hedgerow, the earth trembled. Somewhere out there, a German Tiger tank waited, unseen, unheard, but very much alive. Private First Class Eli Warren, a 23-year-old farm boy from Iowa, sat behind the gun sight, his gloved hands trembling from cold and fear. His commander, Sergeant Frank Doyle, whispered through the intercom, "If that Tiger spots us first, Eli, we're done." The men didn't reply. They knew the math. A Tiger's 88mm cannon could punch through their armor from nearly 2 kilometers. The Sherman's own 75mm gun couldn't even chip the Tiger's front plate at half that range. It wasn't bravery that kept them fighting. It was habit, orders, and the slim hope that luck would hold one more day. By mid-December, the Battle of the Bulge had become a nightmare of whiteout skies and broken tanks. The American 10th Armored Division had lost dozens of Shermans. Each encounter followed the same pattern. Tiger fires once, Sherman burns. The odds were grotesque, almost mechanical. Engineers back home called it technological imbalance. Soldiers at the front called it suicide. Eli wasn't a soldier by nature. Before the war, he repaired barbed wire fences and plows on his father's small farm outside Sioux City. He had the kind of mind that noticed small things. How tension in a wire changed when frost hit, how a plow blade warped after too many strikes on hard soil. None of that mattered here, at least not yet. But as the weeks dragged on, his mechanic's instincts began to gnaw at him. Something about the Sherman's design felt blind. You fired, hoped, adjusted by memory. There was no precision, no feedback. That morning, while waiting for orders, Eli watched Sergeant Doyle and the loader, Mitch, argue over their last armor-piercing rounds. They were down to 3 shells. 3 chances against a Tiger that could erase them in seconds. Eli muttered under his breath, "We're aiming at ghosts." Doyle shot him a glance but said nothing. He knew the kid was right. When the radio finally crackled with new orders, "Advance toward Foy," no one cheered. The snow outside had turned to ice, and the horizon flickered with the dull orange of distant fires. Doyle tapped Eli's shoulder. "We move at first light. Keep that sight steady." Eli nodded, but his eyes weren't on the sight anymore. They were on the coils of wire bundled near the hull, leftover fencing salvaged from a ruined Belgian farm. He stared at them for a long moment, lost in thought. The others didn't notice, but in that frozen silence, something clicked in his mind. Not fear, not faith, but the spark of an idea. It wasn't genius, it was desperation, and a farm boy's stubborn refusal to die blind. The next day, the Ardennes forest was alive with echoes of metal and thunder. Snow kicked up with every shell burst, coating wrecked Shermans in white ash. Eli Warren sat inside Georgia Rose, the tank engine idling low, the air thick with exhaust and fear. Through the narrow periscope slit, he saw what every tanker dreaded, the dark square silhouette of a Tiger tank crawling across a ridge, barely 1,200 yards away. Its turret turned slow, deliberate, confident, like a predator that knew its prey couldn't bite back. "Tiger, 12 o'clock!" Doyle barked. The crew snapped into motion. The loader rammed an armor-piercing round into the breech, slammed it shut, and shouted, "Up!" Eli adjusted the elevation wheel, lined up the crosshairs, and fired. The Sherman shook violently, echoing through his bones. The round screamed across the white field, then ricocheted harmlessly off the Tiger's thick frontal plate. A spark, a puff of smoke, nothing more. "Missed again," Mitch groaned. "You can't miss steel that thick," Doyle muttered. "It just laughs at you." The Tiger's turret rotated toward them. Every man inside Georgia Rose froze. There was a long, silent second, then a blinding flash. The Tiger's 88mm shell tore through the air like a sledgehammer through glass. It hit the ground just short of them, throwing dirt and snow against the Sherman's hull. Doyle shouted, "Reverse! Reverse!" The driver slammed into gear, the treads screaming as the tank lurched backward. Another flash. Another hit. This one closer. When they finally slipped behind a ridge, no one spoke. Eli's hands were shaking. Doyle removed his helmet and ran a trembling hand across his forehead. "We can't keep doing this," he said quietly. "We shoot first. We miss. We die." That night, inside a makeshift camp near Bastogne, Eli sat apart from the others, staring into the flames. Around him, the forest crackled with gunfire. He could hear the low hum of distant engines. Tigers moving again, hunting. His mind wouldn't rest. Every tank manual said the same thing. Flank the tiger. Hit it from the sides or rear. But that was fantasy. In these snow-choked woods, you couldn't flank anything. The terrain turned every engagement into a frontal slugfest, one that Sherman's always lost. He thought back to his father's farm, to the times he'd welded broken plow blades and stretched wire across frozen fields. The trick wasn't brute force, it was precision. If you struck the same spot again and again, even the hardest steel would bend. The problem wasn't the gun, it was the aim. They never knew exactly where their shots landed. No reference, no feedback, no way to correct. He turned his head toward the bundle of wire coiled near the turret wall. Thin, flexible, forgotten. And suddenly he remembered the glow of hot metal under the torch, the way wire shimmered red when struck by sparks. He grabbed a pencil stub and started sketching on the back of an old map. 4 lines forming a cross, a frame, a guide, a way to see what the naked eye couldn't. Doyle approached from behind, watching him draw. "You building us a miracle, farmer?" Eli looked up, his voice low but steady. "Maybe not a miracle, just a way to hit the same damn spot twice." Outside, the night howled with wind and distant explosions. But in that small corner of frozen Belgium, under the flicker of a campfire, a farm boy had just begun to solve the problem that generals, engineers, and entire armies couldn't. By dawn, the cold had sunk so deep into the metal that even touching the hull felt like grabbing dry ice. Frost covered everything: the treads, the gun barrel, even the inside of the periscope glass. But Eli Warren didn't care. He'd been up all night, hunched beside the Sherman with a blowtorch borrowed from the maintenance crew. The others thought he was half crazy. Maybe he was, because what he was doing looked, by every regulation, like sabotage. He'd scavenged lengths of rusted baling wire from a destroyed barn outside Foy, the kind used to mend fences or tie hay bales back home. With numb fingers, he measured and cut 4 pieces, welding them carefully around the Sherman's gun mantle in a rough cross pattern: upper left, upper right, lower left, lower right. The faint smell of burning paint filled the air. When he stepped back, his creation looked ridiculous. A crude spiderweb on the tank's face. Doyle crawled out of the turret and stared at it. "Eli, you welded junk to my tank." "Not junk," Eli said, wiping soot from his gloves. "A reference frame." The sergeant frowned. "A what?" Eli pointed toward the gun barrel. "When we fire, the muzzle flash lights up the front of the tank for just a moment. Those wires will glow, like crosshairs outside the sight. We'll be able to see where the shell lands and adjust the next shot exact, not by guess." Mitch the loader laughed. "You think a couple pieces of farm wire are going to beat German steel?" Eli just shrugged. "Can't be worse than what we've been doing." Doyle hesitated. Technically, Eli had just committed an offense punishable by court-martial, unauthorized field modification. But they were alone out here, freezing, hunted, and running out of time. "Fine," he muttered. "You want to gamble your life on fence wire? Be my guest." At first light, the column moved forward again. 6 Shermans crawling through the fog toward the outskirts of Foy. The snow had turned to mist, heavy and gray, swallowing sound. Eli's hands rested on the elevation wheel, his pulse steady now. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He was a mechanic testing an experiment. Then came the call over the radio. "Tiger spotted, East Ridge, range 1,000. Doyle didn't hesitate. "Hold position." "Fire when ready," Eli adjusted, breathed once, and squeezed the trigger. The cannon roared. The tank lurched. Through the scope, he saw the tracer flash, high and right. But outside, for just an instant, The baling wires glowed orange from the muzzle flash, forming a bright, perfect frame. He could see it. He could see where the shot went. 2 clicks down, half left, he whispered. The loader slammed in another round. Fire. This time the shell struck lower, sparks jumping from the tiger's mantlet. One more, Eli said. His voice was calm, mechanical. Same spot. The third round hit exactly where the second had, and this time, the tiger stopped. A plume of black smoke curled from its turret ring. The crew sat frozen. Doyle blinked. Did we just kill a tiger? Mitch looked through the scope again, disbelief in his eyes. You hit the same spot. 3 times outside, the tiger's hatch burst open. German crew bailing out into the snow. Eli leaned back in his seat, exhaling for the first time in minutes. The stupid wire trick had worked. Word spread fast. Within hours, other crews were copying the mod, welding wires, using scrap rods, even painting marks on their gun mantlets. They called it the farmer's grid. That night, around a campfire, Doyle handed Eli a tin of coffee and said quietly, "You might have just saved more tanks than Detroit ever built." Eli smiled faintly. "Nah, just fix the sightline." By December 22nd, 1944, the snow-covered fields outside Bastogne had become a graveyard of steel. Burned-out hulls dotted the landscape, Shermans and Tigers alike, silent witnesses to a brutal chess match of armor and will. But something had changed. For the first time since the Battle of the Bulge began, the balance was shifting. And it wasn't because of air support or reinforcements. It was because of wire. Eli Warren's farmer's grid had spread through the 10th Armored like wildfire. Crews who'd laughed at it 2 days earlier were now begging for spare wire and torches. Maintenance teams started cutting fencing from abandoned farms, welding rough crosses on tank mantlets by lantern light. What began as one farm boy's desperate gamble became an underground movement of survival. And the results were immediate. Engagement reports told the story. Time to first hit reduced by half, accuracy up 40%, kill ratio doubled. Tankers who once fired blind were now methodical, deliberate, confident. One gunner wrote in his journal, "Without the grid, we were guessing. With it, we're surgeons." On the morning of December 23rd, Eli's unit rolled toward the village of Neff, where intelligence reported 2 tigers blocking the main road. The sky was overcast, wind slicing like glass. Sergeant Doyle's voice came through the radio. "All Shermans hold formation. Remember, aim tight, 3 shots, 1 point." When the first tiger appeared, its silhouette looming through the fog, Eli's pulse didn't spike this time. He waited for range confirmation, 1,300 yards. Adjusted and fired. The grid flashed bright orange. High. He corrected. Fired again. Sparks. The third shot landed dead center on the mantlet joint. A bloom of fire burst from the tiger's turret as its ammunition cooked off. "Target neutralized," the radio crackled. The second tiger tried to flank, but another Sherman, grid-equipped, caught it broadside. 3 precise hits later, it too burned. In less than 2 minutes, the battlefield that once favored the Germans now belonged to the Americans. When the shooting stopped, Doyle climbed out of the hatch, snow crunching under his boots. He looked over at Eli, grinning. "You realize what you've done, farmer?" Eli shrugged, shivering. "Just made our aim a little better." "Better?" Doyle laughed. "You just turned the hunter into the hunted." By Christmas Day, more than 30 Shermans in the 10th Armored had adopted the modification. Word reached other battalions through mess tents and field radios. Crews in the 4th and 9th Armored Divisions began welding their own grids. Reports poured into command posts. Shermans scoring frontal kills on Tigers and Panthers, something previously thought impossible. When Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, commander of the 37th Tank Battalion, arrived to inspect the division, he demanded to see one of the modified tanks. He ran a gloved hand along the welded wire and turned to Doyle. "Who came up with this?" Doyle pointed to Eli, standing awkwardly in his mud-caked overcoat. Abrams studied him for a long moment, then said simply, "You just saved more men than you'll ever meet." He ordered the modifications standardized across his battalion, effective immediately. That night, as the men huddled inside Georgia Rose, Eli sat quiet while Doyle handed him a promotion letter scribbled in pencil. "Corporal Warren," Doyle said with a grin, "your stupid wire trick just made the history books." Eli smiled faintly, looking at the crude grid glowing faintly under the lamplight. "Doesn't look like history," he murmured. "Just looks like survival." Outside, snow kept falling, covering the battlefield, and the twisted hulks of the tigers that had once seemed invincible. By early January 1945, the forests around Bastogne had gone quiet. What had once been a frozen inferno of fire and steel was now just wreckage half buried under snow. The front lines were moving east, the German push collapsing under the relentless counterattack of Patton's Third Army. But for the Sherman crews of the 10th Armored Division, the story wasn't about grand offensives or famous generals. It was about a few strands of baling wire welded in the cold. Eli Warren's farmer's grid was no longer a secret. Word had spread through field reports and mess hall rumors until it reached the desks of colonels and engineers who couldn't quite believe what they were reading. The Ordnance Department sent inspectors to verify. What they found defied every doctrine they'd written. In controlled trials, Shermans equipped with the grid achieved first-hit accuracy 60% faster than unmodified tanks. Follow-up shots were nearly twice as precise. The results were undeniable. By mid-January, the modification had been approved across the 3rd and 9th Armored Divisions. In February, General George S. Patton himself reviewed the reports. He ordered the grid installed on all operational Shermans in his command, calling it a field innovation worth a factory. For once, the American tanks weren't just surviving, they were winning. But somewhere between the battlefields and the paperwork, something else happened. Something Eli never intended. The name of the man who'd welded the first wires disappeared. The official documents credited field maintenance personnel for the modification. No mention of the Iowa farm boy who'd thought of it while staring at a pile of scrap in the snow. When Abrams learned of it, he protested. He even wrote a letter to headquarters insisting that Warren be recognized. But by then, the bureaucracy had buried the story under reports, requisitions, and the endless churn of a war that was already moving on. When peace finally came, Eli didn't wait for medals or ceremonies. He took the first transport home, trading his tank for a tractor, his uniform for a grease-stained jacket. Back in Iowa, he went right back to fixing fences and welding plowshares, same as before. To his neighbors, he was just another veteran, quiet, polite, and always working with his hands. But sometimes in the long Midwest evenings, when the sky turned orange and the fields shimmered with heat, Eli would pause mid-weld and watch the wire glow red. He'd remember that night in Belgium, the blinding flash, the 3 perfect shots, and the impossible kill. He never bragged, never told anyone what he'd done. He didn't need to, because deep down, he understood something that the war had taught him better than any medal could. Real innovation doesn't come from laboratories or generals' desks. It comes from people who are desperate enough to try something stupid and make it work. The official history books would go on to record how American Shermans eventually overwhelmed the Tigers with numbers and coordination. They'd celebrate Patton's strategy, Abrams's leadership, and Detroit's production miracle. But hidden between the lines of those triumphs was the quiet genius of a single farm mechanic who refused to die guessing. When asked years later about his service, Eli reportedly said, "Names don't stop shells. Steel does. That's enough." And somewhere, on a snow-covered battlefield half a world away, a rusted Sherman still lies buried beneath the trees, its gun mantlet wrapped with a faint outline of wire. The remains of a stupid idea that turned fear into precision and survival into legend. Because sometimes the smallest fix changes the course of a war. And sometimes the smartest men look like fools, right up until the moment they save everyone else.